In 1917, the movies are barely 20 years old, silent, black and white, flickering in Nickelodeons and grand new picture palaces. And one film towers over all the rest. The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's epic, technically dazzling and morally poisonous, a film that invents the language of cinema and glorifies the Klan in the same breath. By the numbers alone, it is the most successful film ever made, and it will hold that crown for an astonishingly long time. Through the roaring 20s, as Chaplin and Keaton make the world laugh and Hollywood becomes Hollywood, nothing dethrones it. Sound arrives in 1927. The jazz singer speaks, and the whole industry is reborn. And still, on the ledger of pure box office, Birth of a Nation sits at the top, its total ticking upward with every re-release. For nearly 20 years, a single film from 1915 remains the highest-grossing movie on Earth. There is no television yet, no home video, no second life for a movie beyond the theater. A film's gross is simply how many people, over how many years, will buy a ticket and sit in the dark. And for a very long time, more of them buy a ticket to Birth of a Nation than to anything else. Then, in 1937, Walt Disney bets his entire studio on something no one has dared to try, a feature-length cartoon. They call it Disney's Folly. It is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it becomes the highest-grossing film in the world. And just 2 years later, in 1939, perhaps the single greatest year Hollywood has ever had, another epic arrives that will rewrite the record books for a generation. Gone with the Wind. Nearly 4 hours of Civil War romance, sweeping and grand and impossibly long, and audiences cannot get enough of it. It passes Snow White, and then it simply stays. Here the chart reveals its strange secret. There is no streaming, no home video, no way to see a film except in a cinema. So the studios do something we have forgotten. They re-release the hits again and again, every few years, to a brand new audience. Gone with the Wind returns to theaters in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, each time adding millions more to its total. Snow White does the same. The two of them leapfrogging at the very top, trading first place like an old married couple, and nothing new can catch them. The world changes. A war, then a boom, then television in every living room, and the panicked studios answer with bigger screens and wider color and biblical spectacle. The 10 Commandments, Ben-Hur, casts of thousands. They make fortunes. They still do not pass Gone with the Wind. For a quarter of a century, the highest-grossing film in the world is a movie about the Old South, made before the Second World War. A child born the year it premiered could be grown, married, and raising children of their own, and Gone with the Wind would still be number one. It is the longest reign in the history of the box office, and even now, once you adjust for inflation, no film has ever truly beaten it. The challengers keep coming, and for a while, they keep losing. In 1965, The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews on an alpine hillside, becomes a phenomenon The film families go back to see 5, 6, 7 times the biggest new picture in a generation. But on the all-time chart, the old guard still holds Snow White and Gone with the Wind, ancient and unbudging, re-released yet again. In 1972, something darker and more modern arrives. The Godfather, a new kind of American epic, the signal that old Hollywood is ending and a new one beginning. The totals creep upward, the gap narrows, and still the record set before the war refuses to fall. 50 years into the story, it will take something genuinely new to break it. It begins with a shark. In the summer of 1975, a young director named Steven Spielberg releases a monster movie called Jaws into theaters everywhere at once and watches the lines wrap around the block. It is the first true summer blockbuster, and it climbs the chart toward a record that has stood since before the war. 2 years later, it is eclipsed by something far bigger. In 1977, Star Wars arrives, and nothing is ever the same. It is not just a film, it is a galaxy, a toy aisle, a religion. At last, the old kings fall. Star Wars seizes first place and holds it, the highest-grossing film in the world, for the better part of a decade. Then, in 1982, a small story about a boy and an alien who only wants to phone home. E.T. quietly outgrosses even Star Wars and takes the crown for itself. The reigns measured in decades are over. Now the record changes hands every few years, each champion bigger than the last, as Hollywood learns the modern formula: open everywhere, sell the toys, make it an event. The blockbuster has been born, and the numbers will never be small again. And then they cross a line no film had ever touched. In 1993, Spielberg, again, Jurassic Park, Dinosaurs Made Real, becomes the first movie in history to gross $1 billion. $1 billion. The ceiling is simply gone. But the film that defines the era is still to come, and almost no one believes in it. It is wildly over budget, months behind schedule, more than 3 hours long, and all of Hollywood is bracing for catastrophe. In December 1997, Titanic opens, and the world goes to see it, and then goes back and back again. A generation of teenagers returning a dozen times to watch the great ship go down. It does not break the record. It obliterates it, sailing past $1 billion, past $1.5 billion, climbing toward 2, a margin no film has ever managed before. James Cameron's romance becomes the highest-grossing film ever made, and then, impossibly, it stays there for 12 straight years. It reigns through the turn of the century, through the rise of the internet, through an entire decade of bigger and bigger movies, and not one of them can touch the ship, until its own director comes back to sink it. In 2009, James Cameron returns with Avatar, Blue Aliens, a new kind of 3D, a world audiences have to see on the largest screen they can find. It passes Titanic, climbs beyond $2.5 billion, and becomes the highest-grossing film in history. And now a new force is rising beneath it, the superhero. In 2012, the Avengers assembles, and Marvel begins its long march up the chart. In 2015, Star Wars returns, and The Force Awakens roars past 2 billion. The top of the list is no longer made of single films. It is franchises now, cinematic universes, machines engineered to break records on opening weekend. In 2019, they finally do it. Avengers, Endgame, the climax of 22 interlocking films, storms past Avatar and seizes the all-time crown for one brief, shining moment. Cameron's reign looks finished, and then he simply re-releases Avatar in China and takes first place right back. In 2022, he does it again, landing a second film in the top 3 with Avatar, The Way of Water. And so, by 2026, here is the joke the whole century has been building toward. The 4 highest-grossing films ever made are Avatar, Avengers, Endgame, Avatar Once More, and Titanic, 3 of them directed by a single man. 100 years after a silent epic ruled the world, the box office finally has its kings. And the only number that ever decided it was the simplest one of all: how many people bought a ticket.